Hey, what's up everybody? It's Lids, and we're back for some more Mass Effect Andromeda multiplayer, but it's just me today, making up for our usual time because I was out of town this week, so basically it's just me, no requests from chat, probably no one that we know in our matches, unless we happen to see some familiar faces there just out of pure coincidence, and we'll probably keep things a little bit shorter as the dailies did just reset, so I'll more or less just look to get those done, and maybe we can get a Plat Apex or a little bit more on top of that, depending on whether we can get some other random peoples in. I suppose we can still look at some of the potential rewards here. Ultimate character, not interested in that, and then, I mean, we could do a little bit of the packs, not a ton of them, though. But I suppose there's a chance we can still get something to happen here. Wait! What? Sonad Siphon, rank 10. Okay, it's now maxed out. This is our second ultra rare weapon variety that we've maxed out, I think. So we got the, what was it? The Valkyrie Concussive, I believe, was number 1, and we were saying, oh, that would be funny if the Valkyrie Siphon, which I think is now also ranked 9 as well. We were wondering if that might be number 1 and number 2. Watch it be right here. No, it's the Hurricane Concussive. That's all the way up at rank 9. Okay, so I mean, we're getting close on a lot of those weapon varieties, which is an encouraging sign. As for what we have in store for today, it's Magma, it's Gold. That means we do have some flexibility. As I said, the dailies did just restart just a few minutes ago, so there is a decent chance we may be able to pop a board here in someone else's party, or if not, maybe get some other people tagging along with us. At this rate, they reset 5 minutes ago. We may have just missed the train. But hopefully, at least one of the trains, hopefully there's at least one other contingent of people who's still looking to get this set of dailies done. Take a look at, what was the other thing? Oh, the, oops. Wouldn't help if I made it private. What are the apexes? Some of them that are in progress. That is done. That's not bad. Although usually the sequencing is people get the prestige dailies done and then go for one or more of the apex missions. But no such luck at the moment, and I will admit, I am not the biggest fan of solos. I mean, bronze solos are usually pretty straightforward, but anything silver and up can get a little dicey at times. You start getting to the whole, what objective are you going to randomly give me, and where is it going to be located? Because that obviously can be a pretty big factor, and sure, if you're taking an infiltrator, then maybe that's not a huge deal, or at least not as big of a deal. But if you want to just hang out with whatever character you like, you know, like if we were to go kineticist, gold solo, when the going is good, it's good. When the going gets bad with this character, it gets really bad. So maybe best we play it safe here, whether that be with a huntress or some other more standard infiltrator of a different variety. Could go Juggernaut, although admittedly I don't use him very often. We'll see if we happen to have gotten any random people in here. Let me double check that I actually got these dailies correct. That could also lead to us not finding people. Gold Magma. Gold Magma. Okay, so it is correct. I think I'll set this for Cat. I think I will... I mean, it's not going to be the end of the world if we have a match or two in which we are not benefiting from bonus points for these stats. So we'll be okay. We can go the try-hard route, even if not often the biggest of fans of this. I mean, I do like the Huntress a lot, don't get me wrong. But on this occasion, yeah, we're gonna have to be a little more strictly business, I'm afraid. Which means perhaps this is a good time to note, as we do get started with this as a solo. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna try one more time. See if we can find someone else who's doing this. Otherwise, what I was gonna say is, unfortunately, my controller has started to... Oh, that... enemy doesn't really matter. This is the other thing that matters. My controller has started to fail on me a bit. And I do play Mass Effect Andromeda on a controller. So, specifically, my left bumper has now started to not work sometimes, which, depending on the character, can be a pretty big deal. Is it possible to maybe just use key bindings to work around that? Maybe, but then we're talking about one of the most important buttons changing that, and that's going to mess with me a lot. Because, yeah, it's one of your powers. Obviously, it depends on the character, but it's basically whatever the first power is listed as. So it's, well, technically it's more than that. Because it would be stealth, it would be a throw for the Huntress. However, stealth grid also matters, because stealth grid, you press both the bumpers at the same time. So if one of the bumpers isn't working, that means stealth grid is going to turn into lance, and then I'll have other times when throw just won't activate at all. And it's not happening all the time, but it's happening enough now that it is noticeable, at least for me. Not enough that it is a huge handicap yet, but with a gold solo, the margin for error is certainly a fair bit smaller. Oh, did I set the enemy this time? Oh, no, I didn't. When we reset the lobby, it was no longer locked in, so we got Random Outlaw, which is, for sure, the worst matchup for this character by a pretty significant margin at that. So not thrilled on that front.
Who needs shields anyway?
I haven't been playing this character much as of late. I mean, in general, I've been trying not to play her very much because she was the first character to get her bonus stat maxed out because, well, she was the one we were using more than any other by a significant margin, especially on plat. Love it when you can still see me when I cloak. So yeah, we'll see how we do here. Hopefully, you'll find that there will eventually be other people also looking to do this combination of stuffs, and so they will find their way over here. Just need to bide our time until that happens. On the other hand, it may end up being just us. Be a bit unfortunate, but it is possible. But yeah, so I was out during our usual time block for this stuff. Mass Effect Andromeda, so we weren't able to do it the usual way today. Owie. Also owie. Also, I've said it many times before, but here's your evidence. Pariahs can see you when you're invisible, in any circumstance. I deliberately went in circles around her, and she kept her shield up and knew exactly where I was at all times. She will still know exactly where I am at all times. Which, you know, if the... Oh, that was very sloppy. I saw that we were taking a bunch of damage and absolutely did have the means to prevent this from going down. It was not quick enough to do anything about it. But yeah, like, if that's intended, that makes me really frustrated. But if that's intended, then that's just, you know... atrocious, egregious game design. Inexcusable in my book. Just like how this is getting extremely frustrating. Right as we do end up getting another person. Okay, so now, should be fine now, at this point. The biggest problem is just having 100% of the aggro on us 100% of the time. But I mean, as I said, we're in some ways just stalling until we happen to get reinforcements, but it's just... there are some things about... I know we play this game a lot. There are some things about this game that I really, really do not like, and it is probably the single game that despite... What's the best way to phrase this? It is the game that I most often am putting down thinking I never want to play this game again at the end of whatever my playing session is. This is usually, you know, in whatever off-stream farming sessions I'm doing, where I'm just toiling away by myself, or in some cases with whatever random people have joined us, or in some cases, you know, people who I at least have some familiarity with from playing other matches with them in the past. But it's just, there are so many issues with this game that I know it's one of those things. I think it's the way that people think about Mass Effect Andromeda and describe how good or bad the game is very closely tied to how much they play it, but not in the way that you would expect. People who haven't played it at all, the assumption is obviously, in many cases, or at least you guys may have experienced this too, I have found that in many cases, people's response, what they think of this game if they have played it, you know, little to none, if they've never played it, people say, this is a bad game. It's the worst Mass Effect game. It's not worth playing. It has all these bugs, all these issues. Why would you play this game? Then there are people who do play the game casually or only for a relatively limited amount of time. And to them, the game is great because they see the gameplay improvements that were made relative to Mass Effect 3, and they say, look, this is you know, it's a more modern game relative to Mass Effect 3 or any of the other games in the original Mass Effect trilogy. And then you get people who have played the game a lot, or have pushed the game to, you know, the limits in terms of, you know, doing lots of plat difficulty, or, I mean, maybe insanity on, oh, this is not the target. Maybe insanity on single player. You would also experience this a little bit, but, you know, at least for me, this is coming primarily from the world of multiplayer. If you played it a lot, or played it at a high level, the game really starts to show its warts. And those warts are, in some cases, absolutely horrible. It's just that they either don't come up, or they're small enough that they're easy to brush aside if you don't play very often. So, oftentimes catches me in this weird situation. I don't know if catch-22 is the best way to describe it, but basically, on one hand, the game is, yes, better than what a lot of people think the game is like. Because if you haven't tried it, you know, you're probably not able to appreciate the faster pace, at least of the movements, the, you know, three-dimensionality of it. Those are the most obvious things that are better, or at least more dynamic relative to the original Mass Effect, or original Mass Effect trilogy and Mass Effect 3 specifically. But then, you know, we've brought it up many times before on stream, but the laundry list of problems with game balance of various varieties, weapons, characters, and then the complete disregard for any form of QA. I mean, it's reckless. There are things about this game that make me think that it would have been better made by, you know, a 5th grader. And maybe that's a little bit of hyperbole, but honestly, I don't know that it is. Because when I say there was no QA, I mean, there may at least in some circumstances, been quite literally zero. Zero QA. No testing. Some things that just don't pass the smell test, where you go, did someone truly make... Well, in many cases, it's, you know, this looks like a glaringly obvious issue that 5 minutes of testing would have told you this was something you needed to fix, and yet it didn't happen. So that tells me you didn't even do 5 minutes of testing. Then there are other things that, perhaps even worse than that, they were conscious decisions, things that don't really seem like little coincidences, because the developers would have had to have gone out of their way to implement them. So they didn't happen by accident. And they're horrible things. Horrible design decisions that I just cannot, in good conscience, praise or let alone praise, accept, tolerate. I mean, there are just some absolutely horrible things about this game that... This is an interesting angle that we're shooting from. That'd be another example of something maybe a little more niche, because I can't tell you how many times I've seen characters shooting from cover like that through the object that we were hiding behind. Yeah, so that one relatively minor, although probably something that should have been fixed as well. But many other things that are far worse than that. You don't need me to go through the laundry list, because as I said, we've gone through it many times before. But this type of enemies, the outlaws, have the longest list of issues with them. Whether it be the unlimited range of the Hydras, the fact that the Blaze Hydras can missile you immediately at the start of the wave from the entire length of the map, and that on Platinum, that will one-shot you, and on Platinum 1 life to live, that means you are instantly dead, and even if you cloak, there is nothing you can do to stop it, because those missiles heat-seek onto you, even after you cloak, so you are functionally dead, permanently dead, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. You have no control over it. And that is not a good recipe. Among many, many other things. As I said, I won't bring out the laundry list, but... So it's things... I guess that's one of the reasons that I am not the biggest fan in general, but particularly in Mass Effect Andromeda, of, you know, the super, metaphorically speaking, sweaty approach of, you know, trying to push the limits. Obviously, we do plenty on Plat, and that is where many of these issues are most prominent. But it's at least, in some cases, more tolerable than others. But I think the origin of much of this rant was, if you're doing it any difficulty on solo, the margin for error is inherently much, much smaller. So, bronze solo, okay. You know, the difficulty is still low enough. There's sufficient margin for error there that even if you do run into some of that really frustrating stuff that feels like it just should have been patched out of the game, or shouldn't have been there in the first place, you can either still power your way through it, because the enemies are weak enough, both defensively and offensively, that it's not too punishing, or even if it is punishing and it causes you to go down, or to run into some issues with an objective, you know, it's still easy enough on the lower difficulties that you can, you know, you can just spam some consumables, and then you can power your way through it like that. But, as I was saying at the beginning, you know, could I do gold solos on this game? I'm sure I could. Have I done them before? Probably once. at some point. But never am I going out of my way to do them. In fact, I am always trying to avoid doing gold solos because it is just so painful. I don't mean it, again, I don't really mean it from a pure difficulty standpoint. I mean it just, it brings out all of the worst qualities in the game. And it makes me just not want to continue playing the game anymore and potentially not pick up the game again anytime soon. So, I think, again, from where I was coming from at the beginning of this conversation, this rant, was there probably is, well, okay, I can think of one other game, but there are a few games that I've continued to play despite the amount of frustration that it gives me. Mass Effect Andromeda, upon further reflection, maybe number 2 on that list, but it is... Number 3 is way, way below it. Well, that was interesting. He went flying. Just from the paw. It's another bug, although in that case it's a funny bug. But yeah, Mass Effect Andromeda, I cannot tell you how many times just sessions like this, usually off-stream and not recording, where I'm just trying to get the prestige dailies done, or trying to get the Plat Apex done, or maybe some other Apex as well, where I'm just like, what? This is a horrible experience. Why am I forcing myself to do this? They made me do this, you know? It feels like that. This is not, there are so many things that I would rather be doing than this right now. And, you know, I usually, almost always, basically always, I just, you know, put my head down and say, nope. Get the credits, get the mission funds. Hopefully it doesn't take that long, so it can't be that bad, right? But it happens enough that eventually you're like, no, this is entering, you know, the Einstein territory of keep doing the same thing over and over again, and you expect a different result. Nah, you're going a little crazy if you think things are just gonna magically be better. I mean, these are the types of glitches and bugs that are sometimes flukes that pop up only occasionally, though in other cases they are truly just things that are built into the game and are just poor design decisions overall that are in some ways always going to, they're inevitable. Maybe they're a little bit avoidable or mitigatable, but they're always there in one way, shape, or form. So that stuff gets frustrating the more it builds up. Okay, I suppose this time, perhaps I will lock in Ket, because I do think Ket are generally the least, I mean, buggy in some cases maybe is the problem, but also just poorly designed, to put it broadly. Because, yeah, you know, if you spent... I haven't looked recently at my my timer, how long I've spent playing Mass Effect Andromeda, and it is a combination of multiplayer... Oh, right, I'm no longer the same character anymore. Okay, you know, it would help if I remembered that I'm no longer going to turn invisible and become borderline immune to I mean, not immune, but unlikely to take much damage when I press both of the power buttons simultaneously. Instead, I press throw. So, okay. Note to self, you are playing a different character. Love it when that explosive container blows up on me, nearly killing me. Like, these little things that I jest about, like that explosion nearly killing me. Happens to you once and it doesn't actually kill you? Okay, fair enough. You can laugh it off. But if it actually does kill you, and you're in a solo, and you have to use a gel, you can't get someone else to revive you, that stuff gets really annoying. Really annoying really quickly. So, you know, I feel like I tend to have a pretty high tolerance for those kinds of frustrating experiences, but the amount of times those things have happened to me, in many cases, most of the time, that stuff is happening, you know, as I said, off stream, when just grinding stuff behind the scenes so that we have more credits and mission funds to redeem when we are playing on stream. But it adds up. It just sort of builds on you until sometimes, even when you are, you know, playing on stream, or, yeah, anytime you're picking up the game, it's just like, okay, oh, more of this. Oh, great. Fortunately now, at least we do have another person in the lobby with us. So, you know, don't need to fret as much this time. As I said, though, many of these issues still exist. That's annoying. Many of these issues still exist, even when you have other people in the party, at least. The key thing is, it doesn't feel as punishing when, in most cases, what happens when these weird things happen, the bad thing that happens is that your character dies, which is frustrating, but as long as a teammate is there and can potentially revive you fairly quickly, you don't have to use any of your consumables at that point. You just kind of say, alright. Annoying, frustrating, yes, but, you know, we'll carry on. So, not that it's all sunshine and rainbows, but it does at least make things a little bit better. And then the other thing is that, as someone who streams / records this game, it gets really difficult. That's okay. Well, that's just poor execution on that. That was me being bad. But actually, this does tie into what I was about to say, which is at times it makes it difficult as someone who streams / records this game for other people to watch. When sometimes, you know, obviously we're here to have fun. First and foremost, or at least that is my goal, and hopefully one of the main reasons why you guys are here as well. But sometimes, you know, obviously, even with that being said, there is a certain standard that I suppose we should hold ourselves to, at least to a certain extent, where the game is, at times, more entertaining if we are trying to do more difficult things or trying to, you know, be better. And with any game, you know, not specifically for Mass Effect Andromeda, but I'm just talking, you know, at a very high level. When it comes to watching a game, there are sort of two potential things that can make that game interesting, right? It's either the gameplay itself is very good, the player is really strong, and so you appreciate it from the skill standpoint. Then the other thing is that regardless of how the gameplay is going, it's funny, it's entertaining, it's, you know, there's some other way, not directly tied to the gameplay, that is making things compelling. So, you know, as someone, to bring you behind the scenes a bit, you know, as someone who is doing this stuff, that's something that I try to keep in mind, right? So, there are a lot of games where it's not as if I'm going on the highest difficulty every single time, taking the best quote-unquote character, best quote-unquote weapon every single time, and trying to be the top scorer, set the highest score, or, you know, do whatever it is that is, you know, ranked or or you know, easily quantifiable or like measurable in game to assess how I did. Like, there's something to be said for doing that to a certain extent, again, to sort of play along the lines of the emphasizing the gameplay standpoints, because that's one thing that can be one of the ways in which things can be interesting, but the other is to make things interesting, exciting, entertaining in other ways. So I try to balance those two things. And it varies from one game to the next. It varies from one match to the next. But, you know, that's in part why we, for various games, mix things up. Doing things like, you know, taking requests from chat, or coming up with our own silly challenges or arbitrary restrictions to make things more difficult. And so, does that mean we're going to be setting world records? No. Obviously, by artificially handicapping ourselves, we're going to make things more difficult. Or we're going to focus on things other than just maximizing our score or whatever it is, at least to a certain extent. So those are the kinds of things that we're going back and forth between a little bit. Sometimes maybe leaning more in one direction than the other. But when it comes to Mass Effect Andromeda, that is difficult to a certain extent when it comes to these all these bugs and other issues, especially when we are playing on some of the higher difficulties or going with just a solo or in some cases a duo, is that there are times when, in general, when it comes to Mass Effect Andromeda, I would say we'd lean more toward the doing the difficult gameplay related stuff more so than the other, you know, challenges and whatnot. Just compare it to Mass Effect 3 multiplayer. We do a lot more challenges on Mass Effect 3 multiplayer. We do a lot more plat on Mass Effect Andromeda multiplayer, to put it simply. That also means that requires me to be a little more focused on just getting the job done on Mass Effect Andromeda stuff. And a little less on doing, you know, silly, gimmicky things so that we can still succeed. Or find, or at least do well enough to still have fun while we're going on those higher difficulties. And again, these things, they're not necessarily entirely mutually exclusive, although it is oftentimes that by focusing on one, you do sacrifice a little bit on the other side of things. So there is a bit of a trade-off there. But it's difficult with Andromeda because that one's just bad execution. But this is the thing. Every time something like this happens, every time we die, every time we have an objective that doesn't go smoothly, every time I'm not the top scorer, to put it bluntly, it feels like I need to explain why some of these things happen to justify them in a way. And maybe this is, you know, maybe this isn't strictly necessary, but a part of me, at least, subconsciously feels like it's necessary. But sometimes it's very hard to explain these things, because there are some times where I can say, yeah, I just did something stupid there. I ran around when I didn't have a lot of health. I should have just played it safe and used a healing pack. I was being greedy, thought I could save my consumables, or I was being too reckless. That's one thing. You know, that's user error. Then there are other times where it's just like, yeah, no, I tried to do this thing, and the game just said no. I pressed the button to do this thing. I pressed the button to do that thing, and the game didn't allow me to, which is what happened on that occasion. And so enough of those things happen, and it's like, okay, well, what are we doing here? I can't really take this game. I can't play this game seriously. I can't really push myself take on these sorts of extra challenges, higher difficulties, fewer players, whatever it might be, if the game is throwing us those kinds of metaphorical curveballs, some of which may be arguably a little more predictable and reasonable and avoidable, but that's maybe being a little generous, because there are a lot more that are definitely not in that category. So it's just the kind of thing that makes it hard. It makes it hard to play Mass Effect Andromeda multiplayer. Mass Effect Andromeda in general, but particularly the multiplayer. Especially when we are going on higher difficulties or with fewer people. And obviously it's more of it like, okay, there, a lot of damage. I did use a health pack. But like, I will admit, I didn't play very well this match. I died a lot. Usually, I think I play a lot better than this. And to a certain extent, you know, that's sort of like a damaging. I mean, if you're being really critical, you could say, oh, that's kind of a damaging. Playing poorly in a game in which you are a streamer or, you know, a YouTuber of any variety is detrimental to your brand, to your reputation. Like, oh, Lids, I thought you were a fantastic Mass Effect Andromeda multiplayer player, and yet I saw you go down multiple times in that match, and you didn't even finish first. Ew, gross. It's like, yeah, there are some fair aspects to that assessment, for sure. At the same time, to feel like, you know, I need to perform perfectly at all times and or be able to cover up for the sometimes glaring issues with this game can be really difficult and at times really frustrating. So I guess that's kind of maybe where I'm coming from with a lot of these thoughts. Maybe that's the underlying sentiment. So like if we go for the eyes here, that's a pretty good flat apex. Arguably the best. The map isn't bad. The enemy could be better, could be worse. Unfortunately, we did lose Grinch, who is someone I have played a lot with. It was good that we had him in here. We did have this guy in for all these other matches, and he's been doing pretty well. I have seen him before, but I don't know if I've really played with him on plat before. I'm definitely not about to take the kineticist into this. This very well may be us soloing. Okay, that's not going to happen for all the reasons I was just describing. Let's see if there's anyone else who is mid-match for this. So yeah, I know I've been maybe dumping a whole bunch on Mass Effect Andromeda here, but I feel like, for whatever reason, just being a little more honest, a little more upfront, and pulling back the curtain a little bit more. Maybe it's that, you know, it's just me and there's no one else in Discord with me to bounce off of and or, you know, take the conversation in another direction. But I feel like it's a little bit easier if it's just me to sort of just speak my mind and not get what I'm saying twisted in some other way. And okay, well, as I said, we were trying to get the dailies done, the prestige dailies, and we did get those. They are both now complete. The thing that we are now missing, though, would be that plat apex. Let me just see if we can get any plat of any variety, which admittedly I've not been doing as much of as of late, just doing standard plat matches for the sake of grinding stuff. So this, well, this doesn't look good. Whenever I see someone trying to solo the plat apex, especially if they've already started it, and not to be... Well, if they've started the plat apex before, and I've never seen them previously, so they look like they're, you know, relatively new player who has perhaps never done plat before, it does make me a little suspicious that there are several ways in which people do cheat at times. So I was not pointing any fingers, just saying my eyebrows were raised. I cannot conclude anything from that definitively, but I would have been paying close attention. Let's just put it that way. Okay. Maybe, though, now we can get one more attempt. If we can get something going on plat. I mean, I had thought that since we were slightly late on getting the prestige dailies done, maybe that meant that other people were just a little bit ahead of us, but maybe it's the other way around. Maybe we were actually slightly quicker, or other people were just a little bit slow to get started today. So what if we just do gold real quick, see if there's anyone else who's finishing up the prestige dailies as a group, and if so, maybe we can tag along for the end of that and they'll transition things into plat apex, but it doesn't look like it. Wow. Okay. So maybe we'll just try one more match of any variety. Can we get that? Nope. Whole lot of nothing. So that's not great. I mean, I feel like we should do at least one more match, and if it is to be a solo, then yes, I would prefer for it to be bronze for all of the aforementioned reasons. Unless and until we happen to get someone else in here. And then the nice thing is, you know, if it is bronze, then we don't necessarily need to go with just an infiltrator, or, you know, a stealth grid infiltrator at that, potentially. And mix it up a little bit more. But yeah, I guess it just feels like oftentimes, you know, for whatever reason, oh, I said it for a random arena, didn't I? And it did put us back in this place. I mean, I guess it's more likely we'll get some random people in. It's not gonna satisfy both of the daily criteria, but oddly, it's actually in that situation it would be criterion, because both is singular. Is it? I don't know. Maybe I'm just I don't know. Maybe I'm just tired and cranky, and all these things are why I've been doing a whole lot of complaining today, or at least I feel like that's maybe more so the case. Look at it one way, maybe I've been complaining a lot. Look at it another way, I've just been a little more honest about my experiences with Mass Effect Andromeda, reflecting on both of those on, but certainly off stream as well. So I guess, you know, all that being said, it does kind of beg question then, maybe you've been asking yourself, and I suppose is a fair question to ask, why can't I vault over the cover? That's exactly what you were thinking, right? I knew it. No. Lids, if you don't like Mass Effect Andromeda, why do you continue to play it? And that's kind of a loaded question, but I think it is kind of a fair question. And I think it's difficult to answer because it's complicated to answer. Because if Mass Effect Andromeda did not have these issues, these aforementioned issues, or at least the ones alluded to, then it would be a great game. And so, if you're being optimistic, if you're being a wishful thinker, it's not as if these issues are ever going to disappear. But as I was saying, some of them show their head more often than others. So, you know, you can go through matches where things go relatively smoothly. You don't run into many, if any, of the really frustrating issues, or if you do, they're manageable enough that it doesn't feel too bad when you run into them. However, the thing is that these issues happen often enough, and are at times at least bad enough, that when I do find myself experiencing them, I do get really frustrated. There's a good example of another one that I've mentioned a few times, but we don't see that often, which is the sharpshooters can shoot you, can snipe you when they are running away from you, which just makes no sense. And I feel like anyone who spent at least one match testing the outlaw enemy should have very quickly witnessed that happening and asked some questions about, like, hey, maybe it would make sense if the enemies can only snipe you when they're standing still, or at least facing you. You know, don't have their back turned, running in the opposite direction, because that seems a little silly. I didn't mean to vault that cover. I should drop this. And so, you know, that's a good example of there are also times when, you know, you can take shortcuts and cross your fingers. Like, I kind of just crossed my fingers and hoped, I saw the Audi coming, I just hoped that it was going to do a non-grab attack first so that we would have a chance of finishing the device before it did actually grab us. But it did go straight into the grab, so that was not the case. So I took the wishful thinking approach on that occasion. Small instance, but, you know, the safe thing to do was to immediately drop the barricade, slow down the Audi, such that it would still take longer than not dropping the barricade and not having the Audi grab me, but it would be quicker than getting grabbed.
Enemies incoming. Find a new spot.
So, you know, little things like that, of which there are many. Sharpshooter sniping us from behind. That one's more of an actual issue, I would say, rather than... So that was a gameplay choice that I made. A somewhat reasonable gameplay choice that I had to make between dropping the barricade and not dropping the barricade there. Anything else? What our most recent specific train was on this this train of thought. Oh, that guy's dead. That guy is distracted by those devices on the previous wave. Oh, we did get another person in. I think I have seen this person before.
3 more to go.
Obviously, we don't technically need to finish this match for prestige reasons. We're all set with that stuff, and it's only a bronze, so it's not really giving us much of anything.
Enemies headed your way.
We will see it through. Trying to remember where we left off on things. Something about, oh right, the whole, like, why do you keep on doing it then? Yeah, and, you know, being optimistic versus, you know, it's one thing to be optimistic, it's another thing to be oblivious, or oblivious might not quite be the right word, but like, I've spent, I think it's about 2,000 hours on this game. I can't, in that time, I've run into countless of these issues. I can't unsee, I can't unlearn, I can't unexperience these things. They will forever detract from my previous experiences with this game. And so I can't just ignore those things going forward and just recklessly assume, or again, reckless is not quite, I can't think of the right word for it, but I can't just ignorantly, or I can't find the right word. I can't just assume that it's going to magically get better, because it won't. Because these are, again, things that are programmed into the game that I fundamentally disagree with in some cases, or that are bugs that just should have been tested and fixed. And so there are some times where you're lucky and you don't run into those issues as much, or it's a lower difficulty, or you have enough people in the party, those people are, you know, strong enough players that you can sort of power your way through these issues, and they, even if they exist, they either don't show up as much or they don't feel as punishing for those reasons. So if you get some of those things happening, then you say, okay, you know, I can deal with this. It's not that bad. But on the other hand, it very much is possible for things to go far enough that they do lead to your character getting downed, or potentially requiring you to use a metagel, which you may have some concerns about running out of in the given match, especially if things have been difficult for, you know, several waves, or you've gone down multiple times in that wave. You know, the objective might cause you to lose the objective if the game randomly assigns you one of the most difficult ones and you have no control over that. We've talked about that many, many times. All these sorts of things that are just variables, some of which you do have control over, many of which you don't. If you get lucky, maybe you'll be okay, and your experience will still be good.
3 more to go.
But unfortunately, luck is a huge factor in this game regarding how good your experience is, because there are so many issues with it that in a normal session, you are going to find some of these things. It is just a matter of how manageable they will be. So, it's a combination. The reason why I continue to play this game is a combination of things. It's in part because sometimes I go long enough without running into these issues that I feel okay. Doesn't feel as bad. I'm gonna be honest with you, that isn't very often. Usually I do run into those issues to the point where it is frustrating enough that I do not want to play the game anymore on a given day. And you can say, oh, you know, just being a sore loser. Maybe. To a certain extent. But I feel like that implies that, you know, you're getting upset about unreasonable things. And I think there are very many, very reasonable things to be upset about in this game. So usually that is not the reason. It is usually not that I get lucky enough that I don't run into issues. That's generally not the reason why I want to continue playing. Usually the only time that's the case is if I'm only logging on for a very brief amount of time to get the prestiges done, and that's about it. Part of it is, you know, I want to be respectful of the people who we play with, whether that be on stream and, you know, in chat, or even just people who I've played matches with over now a few years in game, even if they're not people who tend to show up on stream. You know, all the people I said, oh yeah, I recognize this person. And some of it is just, you know, personal ambition of, in general, if I have a long-term goal with measurable ways to keep tabs of how much progress I've made toward those goals, that progress is, at least somewhat predictable, or especially if it can't get removed, there's no way of backtracking your progress, then I tend to be very capable of doing long, grinding-centric things like, for example, leveling up all of our characters, maxing out many or eventually perhaps all of our weapons, those kinds of things. Bonus stats, I can get a fair bit of motivation from those things, but there are some competing forces there. There are things that do make me continue to want to play this game, but there are many things that make me not want to continue to play this game. So, there's my honest assessment, my honest thoughts about Mass Effect Andromeda. Probably the most, if not the most honest, at least the most I've articulated these thoughts that we have often touched upon in the past. This person is looking to do, let me just see. I was thinking we might wrap up there, unless... are there particular apexes we'd like to do? I mean, we could try this, although I do feel like we'd probably need... Oh, one more person who has perhaps arrived just in the nick of time, except that... Alright, this is the person, obviously, who we were playing with earlier. They did abandon us before we started this one previously, so I don't know if they are going to stick with it here, or if they are going to bail. With just the two of us, neither of whom is currently an infiltrator, that does kind of feel necessary. I know we were doing hunters before. I'd rather not have to resort to that, although if there is only one infiltrator, that is probably the optimal way to go. But again, kind of along the lines, to a certain extent, of what I was talking about before, I'd rather not have to feel forced into doing the most optimal stuff every time, because that gets boring. Basically. It's bland. It's uninspired. It's not especially interesting to me. I do like this character. I do like her playstyle. But I have some reservations for those reasons. And this is Plat, so I guess we can bump up the level of those consumables. Okay, let's see. So I'm not thrilled by how they've not thrown on any consumables. That does concern me a bit. Oh, this is go for the eyes, isn't it? Yeah. So we could potentially justify, instead of this, going with this. Did they just abandon us? Okay, they did. As I said, not particularly surprised by that, since they did do that earlier. Let's try it one more time. Searching for a random plat, and if we can't find one, then I think we might call it here, and then maybe just poke our heads in the shop, see if we can pick up a couple more packs. Not that we've done that much today, as I said. Was mostly just keeping this short, more or less. Just the the extent to which I would do a usual daily grind of prestige missions, plus ideally the Plat Apex, although times such as these, you see, that's actually, I suppose, another potential source of frustration is there aren't that many people who play Mass Effect Andromeda multiplayer, so getting a group together is not always a given. It's one thing when we have the stream on and we have a regularly scheduled time, and so we sort of have people who tend to conglomerate at that designated time, but on other days when I'm just trying to check off the boxes, get these things done, sometimes there are other people to team up with, other times, unfortunately, there are not. So thank you for stopping by for my TED Talk. Alright, actually we're back, and we're loading into a random match that I found with these people. because there was at least one or two other things I was thinking about that I don't really think I got to articulate as much as I wanted to. Just see what wave we're on here. Oh, never mind. We're about to extract. Okay. I'm not sure I'm going to have time to say them now, but I suppose maybe I'll make it quick then. Going back to that point I was talking about where, you know, it felt like, you know, every mistake, there can't be any mistakes. Oh, also, I didn't realize this character. There can't be any mistakes. You know, I need to top score every match, and you know, everything needs to have a good reason for happening, which is more or less what I was at least brushing on before. And, you know, that is, at least in some ways, how I feel from the standpoint of someone who is, you know, demonstrating showing their gameplay on stream / on video. But I wish it wasn't that way. It feels like that needs to be the case, because to a certain extent it feels like that is the expectation that you guys have of me as the person who does this stuff. And, you know, maybe that's not the case after all, and, you know, that's just you know, something that I've made up in my own head. But it definitely feels like at times, you know, when people bring things up like, oh, you know, this is how many points you score, this is how many points this person scored, and what have you, it just feels like, you know, people are giving that a lot of attention and putting a lot of weight into that, and I really wish that wasn't the case. It feels like, you know, in some ways, you know, it's an arbitrary number, the scores, and, you know, and nobody's ever going to be perfect. Even the best players, sure, maybe really good players can make up for some of these sorts of you know, mistakes or play around some of the issues that the game has, and yeah, that is the case to a certain extent, but there are also times when personally I just get really frustrated with these sorts of issues with the game, and I'm done just trying to deal with them and just say, all right, you know, whatever happens, happens. We'll leave it at that. And if that means, you know, we're not going to be the top scorer on this match, then so be it. Or if that means we're going to go down on this wave, then so be it. So, to me, it feels like in an ideal world, we wouldn't... Not that I'm saying, you know, these sorts of standards don't matter, because as I was saying before, to a certain extent, one of the reasons why people watch gameplay is because they want to see high-level gameplay. But it just feels like at times we put way too much weight into those things, and it's almost dehumanizing to a certain extent. Maybe that's a strong way to phrase it, but I mean, if people aren't allowed to make mistakes and they have to come in first every time, it's like, well, what are we doing here? You know? All right. And if the only thing that matters is the score at the end, then just have a robot do it for you who always finishes first, and nothing else matters, right? That just feels ridiculous to me. So that's why, at least for me, fun first and foremost is the name of the game. But it does feel like, you know, at times, whether people do it intentionally or not, I definitely get those signals, both from people in chat, in comments, and in games with me, sometimes even in Discord. And so, you know, whenever that happens, sometimes, or oftentimes when that happens, I just sort of, you know, say, all right, whatever, you know? Like, I have enough confidence in myself as a Mass Effect Andromeda player that I know I can perform at a high standard, but at the same time, I am a human being. It's okay for me to make mistakes sometimes, and it's okay for me to get frustrated sometimes or lose focus sometimes and do some things that are not perfectly optimal. Because again, you know, if we're doing only the things that are most optimal at all times, then what are we doing? We're turning everything into a formula. We're turning everything into an equation, a system that is, you know, solved. And then there's no creativity, there's no personal expression. And to me, that just really takes out so much of the joy of the gaming experience. So I really dislike when that's the direction that things go in. And, you know, like, to each their own. I get it. For some people, that stuff is more important than to others. like I said, I totally get that. For some people, that is far and away. Oops, he says, for example, he says as he jumps off the edge of the map accidentally and nearly does it twice in a row, no less. But, you know, for some people that's a lot more important than it is for others. You know, for some, you may say I care very little, if at all, about, you know, the commentary, the creativity, the personal expression, the personality of the people who are playing the games that I watch. All I care about is the best possible gameplay, the most efficient gameplay, the most difficult gameplay, all that stuff. And, you know, fair, as I said, if that's your personal preference, then you're allowed to have your own opinions. I'm just saying that, for me, oftentimes I find myself maybe not squarely on the opposite end of the spectrum. I just find that as a streamer, I am definitely exposed at times to people who feel much more strongly on the everything must be optimal side of things. And I think that takes away a lot of the fun, oftentimes. So, I do, even if I don't verbally push back on those things, that is oftentimes the way that I feel about them. And as I said, it's not as if this is a be-all, end-all, or a universal truth. Because it does vary from one day to the next, from one game to the next. If anything, as I was saying before, I feel like, you know, Mass Effect Andromeda, I'm probably further on the whole things need to be, or I hold myself to a higher standard gameplay-wise on that. And, you know, to be honest with you, that is in part because oftentimes when I am playing Mass Effect Andromeda, that is because I am one of the people, at least when we're pushing the difficulty in one way or another, usually when we're on plat. You know, if you have a lot of responsibility in the game falling on your shoulders, where whether it be you are tasked with getting objectives done, which on plat is no joke, especially if the game deals you a bad hand. And then, you know, in terms of getting the kills to advance the wave, usually that's the thing that shows up the most when it comes to points. And also things like reviving teammates, keeping them safe in other ways. You know, there are lots of ways in which you can contribute that are meaningful on Platinum in particular. Some of those ways are more reflected than others in your score at the end of the match, but at the end of the day, that is a somewhat arbitrary number to attempt to demonstrate how significant your contributions were. And I know that those numbers are not always particularly accurate, but when one points to those numbers and says, look at this, and anytime you try to derive any sort of meaning from those numbers, you are implying that, you know, you do assume that those numbers hold some meaning. Sometimes some somewhat significant meaning, and sometimes that doesn't feel accurate or fair to the other players, especially if we're like... The other thing that really bothers me is if we're constantly, and this is closely related to it, but if we're constantly like comparing other players relative to one another, it's like, what are we doing here? You know? We're here to play a video game. We're not here to judge people. People are coming from various places, various levels of experience and interest,
Enemies down. Keep your guard up.
and taking different approaches from one game to the next, you know? Just because somebody didn't score as many points in a given match doesn't mean they're not as good of a player. They may have done other things to contribute to the match that don't show up as much on the score sheet. And they may be newer players to Mass Effect Andromeda. They may be newer to that difficulty or whatever it may be. It doesn't make them a worse person. But it does... I mean, maybe, again, maybe I'm kind of reaching logical conclusions here, but I'm just saying I don't believe these things to be true. But when every time someone starts to open up to that conversation of deriving any sort of meaning from those scores at the end of the match, it does start to veer in that direction. To a certain extent. At least to a certain extent. How much obviously varies wildly from case to case. But just feels like that can get pretty toxic pretty quickly. And I don't like that. We're here to have fun. We're not here to judge other people. So, that's my approach for other people who are in the lobby with me. And that's also my general thought on when it comes to deriving meaning out of my own scores as well. So, in general, I prefer not to read into those things all that much. I feel like there's one other thing that I wanted to mention as well that I forgot. That was maybe the big thing? But yeah, so if it were up to me, you know, that just wouldn't really be a topic of conversation much, if at all. And especially when it comes to doing stuff on Platinum. Mass Effect Andromeda community is small enough, especially the people who play on Plat, that do it long enough and you will have played a Mass Effect Andromeda Platinum mission with most of the people who play Mass Effect Andromeda Platinum missions at least once. And it gets to the point where you start to recognize and grow familiar with some of the people who you've played matches with before. And so, you know, don't need to be judging these people for their performance in every match, because it's like, oh yeah, no, I've done matches with this person on Plat before. You know, we've gotten the job done before. We can do it again. So you kind of just get a feel for it, right? Like, yeah, we can do this. We can make it work. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter which one of us finishes on top. Second, third, or fourth. We have a common goal here. Throw one of these down. Yeah, I feel like there's one other thing that I'd forgotten to mention, but I feel like that was the primary thing that I wanted to further articulate. That although I do think about those things, it is mostly because I assume that other people are thinking about those things because they bring it up on occasion, but I wish that those were not things that we had to give much time, thought, or effort into. Well, effort's not the right word. Time or thought into those things. Alright. As I say, I feel like there was one other thing that I had forgotten to discuss that I meant to bring up, but I have once again forgotten what it is, so on that note, I will leave you there. And once again, the moment that I stop recording is the moment I remember the other thing that I wanted to talk about. So we are back with a random team here. In fact, it may be the same team we were with a minute ago. So we'll see how far into this match they are. But the other thing that I wanted to mention was going back to the whole, hey, Lids, it sounds like there are a lot of things that you don't like about this game. maybe more things you don't like about it than you do, why do you keep on playing it? And so sort of talked about that, or at least the various pros and cons. But in terms of how it all adds up, I think you're right to think that there are times when it does feel like there are more cons than pros, more bad things than good things about this game, and that's why there are times when it feels like, you know, what am I doing this for? Is it really worth getting really frustrated several nights a week? Or maybe not every single time I play, but still several times a week just from grinding up resources. Is it worth the time and the effort? There are definitely times, many times, where it feels like the answer is no. So, as I said, one of the things that keeps me going is a level of commitment to you guys, both the people who watch and who play along with me. So thank you, those of you who have been hanging out with me throughout this Mass Effect Andromeda process. But some of it is also just creating goals in my head to try to reach. Checkpoints I can say, this is the next place I want to try to get to, however arbitrary that checkpoint might be. But it's a way of just sort of keeping me motivated, especially, you know, if it's getting late at night and I think to myself, oh, I forgot to do today's Mass Effect Andromeda missions. Oh, do I have to do them? Well, you know what, I'll log on for a little bit and hopefully I can bang them out quickly. And, you know, that happens a lot. It would be very easy to just sort of say, no, I don't have to do those things, right? Or, I don't have to farm up more credits this week. And to be fair, I have been doing that less often as of late, so I suppose that does partially answer your question, is that it perhaps does feel like there is less and less reason to continue grinding as much as I have, at least when there are more opportunity costs, right? By spending more time doing Andromeda daily mission grinds, things that I'm very rarely ever making videos or streams for, outside of our one designated Mass Effect Andromeda stream per week, and outside of, you know, what we're doing today. And most of that stuff is just kind of like dead time that just never sees the light of day. So it feels, in some ways, as if many of the other things that I do, other ways that I spend my time are more fruitful. You know, rather than grinding Mass Effect Andromeda dailies every day, I could be spending that time doing other videos or streams or other non-content creation related things, because I am a human being who has other things that they need to do as well. So all that is to say that there may very well be a time where it no longer feels worthwhile to continue to play Mass Effect Andromeda, because, you know, if I'm being honest, as probably does not come as a surprise to you guys, and as I'm pretty sure I've said before, Mass Effect Andromeda is not my favorite game of the ones that we find ourselves playing and or streaming on a regular basis. So if we are looking to make more time for other games, either ones that we currently play or to add ones that we have yet to play, and, you know, there are plenty that have caught my attention in the past that I just haven't been able to create the time for. You know, if we were to, in those alternate universes, either stop playing Mass Effect Andromeda or reduce the amount of time we spend playing Mass Effect Andromeda, in that case likely by, you know, doing less or not doing any of the grinding in between streams, which, you know, I don't do that for Mass Effect 3 multiplayer, I only do that for Andromeda. It's a lot of time each week. But, you know, there may come a time where it seems like it no longer makes sense to spend this much time doing Mass Effect Andromeda multiplayer, so I guess I wanted to give you guys a heads up that, hey, you know, there may be a time when we choose to stop doing Andromeda stuff, and whether that is once we reach some of those arbitrary goals, you know, things like maxing out all of our weapons, things like maxing out all of our bonus stats, things like, I don't know, getting arbitrary amounts of Apex rating, like, what is it, 100,000, for example. Could it be any of those things? Maybe. Could it be just a given point in time when it feels like the frustrating things with Mass Effect Andromeda have been particularly plentiful, and the upsides, the fun parts of Mass Effect Andromeda have for whatever reason not been as plentiful? Then that could certainly be the impetus as well. But I guess I just wanted to, in the interest of, again, just continuing the theme of full transparency, that is a thought that has crossed my brain many times before. You know, how much of a serious thought that is, of course, varies from one time to the next, but as I said, it's pretty often that I do find myself getting frustrated by the Mass Effect Andromeda experience and saying, alright, that's enough of this for today, and not particularly looking forward to the next time when I play this game. So it does continue, but there may come a time where we move on from Mass Effect Andromeda, and you know, that's okay. Obviously, everyone who has been playing and or watching the various Mass Effect Andromeda single-player and multiplayer stuff that we've done over the past several years, thank you for that, and I've had fun doing that stuff, especially the stuff that has been with other people. As I said, there have been some very high highs, but also, unfortunately, some very low lows. It's just that those are usually things that happen off-stream. Then, you know what, I think it's okay to move on from those kinds of things if it feels like the time is right. And I'm not saying that's the case right now, but I'm saying that I just wanted to let you guys know that, you know, so it doesn't feel like it's coming completely out of nowhere. There may be a time when, you know, we're not that far away from maxing out all of our bonus stats. We're not that far away from maxing out all of our ultra-rare weapons. That one's probably a little more time-consuming, I imagine, although we are getting close on several fronts. We aren't that far away from hitting 100,000 Apex rating, and again, none of those things are, you know, absolute things that could you know, spell the end of Mass Effect Andromeda multiplayer, but those are, as I said, some of the things that have kept me motivated when I've had some of those rough patches and thought, okay, well, you know what? Sure, this match was annoying, but I've put in a lot of work to... I've been grinding a lot, many hours spent working toward getting our max health and shield regeneration, delay of reduction maxed out to perhaps get every single bonus stat up to level 10, and that's, yes, it is arbitrary to a certain extent, but on the other hand, it does feel kind of meaningful, because I remember when we were first starting out and took a look at these bonus stats, and maybe it wasn't immediately obvious, but pretty soon it became clear, yeah, these are going to take an unbelievably long amount of time and effort to level them up, and it just seemed like it would be impossible for us to ever max out all of them. So it does feel like there is some meaning to getting them maxed out, because I have legitimately put in a lot of effort toward them, and there's a reason why we play primarily characters with those two bonus stats that we still have remaining, and there's a reason why even off stream I tend to do that. So there is still some meaning in that. There is some meaning in getting all the weapons maxed out, because we obviously have put a lot of time and effort into getting those things, and in between streams, as I said, if it's not just going for the mission funds, it's also, at least used to be more of, trying to just farm plat missions or gold missions to a certain extent to get those extra credits so we can regularly have a meaningful amount to cash in from one week to the next. So, you know, all these things are, you know, They're things that we've been working toward along the way on our Mass Effect Andromeda journey, and I don't know where that journey ends. But I'm just saying that, you know, there may come a day when we say Mass Effect Andromeda was fun, but we're ready for other things, so let's move on.